Hello, everyone. This is the 184th episode of Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles and the Soccer Nostalgia blog. For this episode, I interview Italian author Mr. Roberto Amorosino as we discuss the historical Italy versus West Germany World Cup semifinal on June 17, 1970, dubbed as the match of the century. Mr. Amorosino has in the past worked at the international organizations in the human resources area between Washington, D.C., Paris, and Rome. He writes for the Italian sports website www.sportmemory.it and is the author of the Italian language book Venti di Calcio. Mr. Amorosino appeared on a podcast just recently discussing Juventus during the decade of the 1970s. Welcome back, Roberto.
Thank you.
Before we get into this match from the Italian perspective, let's discuss the affairs of both teams. I will start with West Germany and its evolution since the last World Cup in 1966. To remind everyone, West Germany in 1966 had reached the final of the World Cup, losing to hosts England. In that tournament, a certain young Franz Beckenbauer had come to prominence playing in midfield at that point, and you still had the veteran Uwe Ziller leading the team. By this point in 1970, they were still managed by Helmut Schoen, in charge since 1964, who had taken over from the legendary Sepp Herberger in 1964. He himself would manage the team for another 14 years until 1978. By this 1970 World Cup, Uwe Ziller is the captain of the team. He's playing in his fourth World Cup. We mentioned Franz Beckenbauer. His Bayern Munich teammates included Sepp Maier in goal and the goal scoring machine Gerd Müller. Other players in the team included Karl-Heinz Schnellinger, who was playing for AC Milan in Italy. Others like wingers like Libuda, Grabowski, and young Bertie Vogts as well. And Helmut Haller, another Italian bass player who had won the Scudetto with Bologna in 1964, but was now playing for Juventus. Wolfgang Overath, another player that football history fans would know. It's a very strong team and just as strong as in 1966 and could have been champions in 1970 as well. Coming to this World Cup in the first round, they won all their matches against Morocco, Bulgaria, and Peru, with Gerd Müller scoring two hat tricks along the way. And in the quarterfinal, it was a rematch of the 1966 World Cup final against England. They were losing 2-0 before they won 3-2. In the process, they may have exerted too much energy before facing Italy. So now let's go to Italy and discuss the state of the affairs and its evolution since the last World Cup.
Very different situation from Germany. Very different situation because Germany, as you mentioned, is the finalist of the World Cup 66. Italy is actually going through the worst ever defeat and experience in the history of Italian football, at least at that time, since the beginning of the beautiful game. Italy in Middlesbrough will lose facing North Korea, a game that was expected to win, and North Korea was the biggest surprise. I mean, make it the story short, because probably Italy, North Korea would deserve another 2 hour discussion, the before the game and the after. But end of the story, Italy is out after the group stage for this historic defeat with North Korea. And it's going through, of course, a major crisis. But when we discuss how we make it back 4 years later, it's something almost difficult to explain, but it's a combination of the fact that Korea defeat didn't really was the expression of the Italian level at that point because Italy football was decent. Inter Milan was one of the biggest team with a couple of foreign players, of course, in the squad, but able to win European Cups. And Italy had a chance to host the Final Four at that point of the European Cup just 2 years later and going back to the top. So from North Korea in less than 2 years, Italy will manage to win the European Cup, beating Soviet Union in the semifinal and Yugoslavia after the replay match in 1968 in Rome, 2-0. So the Italian team is back to some extent and goes to Mexico with good hopes. Something new comes also up in the Italian scene with a new team, to some extent, able to win this historic season. The title in 1970 is won by Cagliari, the team from Sardinia that never experienced being on the top. The season before was close to win, but in 1970, the Italian champions are Cagliari. Very good team, making different players, acquiring players from Inter Milan, from other teams, building a very strong team, but definitely with a major leader, Gigi Riva, the left wing that is becoming the leader of not only Cagliari, but also of the Italian team. Italy will make it to the World Cup, Mexico, qualifying after beating in the group Wales and East Germany. And most of the goals, making the story short, were scored by Gigi Riva. So around Gigi Riva, the Italian team is going to Mexico with very good hopes. Other good players, we have Mazzola, we have Rivera, we have a solid defense with basically the Inter Milan defense to some extent, with players also from Cagliari. So it's a good team, but everything, the media, the attention, even the attention of the rivals of the other teams is around Gigi Riva. How to stop Gigi Riva, because he's a good scorer and a very difficult player to stop. So Italy goes to Mexico after Korea, but more importantly, after winning the European Cup and with the hope to do well. We're talking about a World Cup with 16 teams. So going through the first group stage was seen as possible, and that what meant already to be in the top 8 of the world.
They advanced through that first group just by scoring once through a long range shot from Angelo Domenghini when they defeated Sweden, and they had scoreless ties against Uruguay and Israel.
Correct. There are several photos where you could see Gigi Riva isolated, surrounded by 4 or 5 Swedish players. It was a different game at that time, and they managed to stop him. And Italy was lucky to score the only goal with Domenghini in one of the few mistakes of a great goalkeeper, Hellström from Sweden, but Italy to some extent deserved. Then Italy-Uruguay was still considered one of the most boring games ever played. No, nothing exciting. And Italy played a bit better with Israel in the third game. They was starting to see something, managed to score twice. Both goals were disallowed for offsides, basically. Or Italy didn't win. It was good enough to go through. Of course, it was not the best possible news going through that way, because we ended up playing in the quarterfinal the host team. Not in Mexico City, not at the Azteca, but still playing Mexico, that of course had this good team, but also this big thing about playing with the altitude, playing home with the home crowd and everything else. So it was considered a tough match to play, also because we started to have this nightmare of the impossible thing of Gigi Riva not scoring. It was really not expected Riva not to score in 3 consecutive matches. So if we don't score, okay, solid defense, everything else, but there was this issue. It was a national drama waiting for Riva to score, and the feeling that, of course, we couldn't go very far without Riva scoring. Remember also because Riva was expected, maybe just to mention, because then we go towards the game. In the 22 players called for the World Cup, the start number 9, the forward, was Pietro Anastasi. There was only 22, but already winner of the European Cup where he scored in the final. So he was also had a very good reputation. But just the night before leaving to Mexico, he didn't feel well. It's still a controversy what really happened. There was an accident, it was a disease, but end of the story, he was not able to fly and to go to Mexico. So last minute decision of the Italian Association and Ferruccio Valcareggi, the coach of the national team, was to call two players replacing Anastasi, two strikers, Pierino Prati and Roberto Boninsegna. And they both went to Mexico knowing that Italy had to select before the deadline 22 players. So there was no space for both. And again, something totally unexpected happened. They were both kept into the team. And Giovanni Lodetti, actually a midfielder, was left out of the 22 players squad. So Italy added two strikers, replacing one missing striker. And Boninsegna, for not going to the World Cup, ended up being the number 9 of the team. And as we will see in a minute, being very relevant for the tournament.
We touched up on West German manager Helmut Schoen. He'd been a player for Dresden, and I believe he had played for the German national team in the 1940s before becoming a manager. I believe he had managed Saarland, if I'm not mistaken, before becoming assistant to Sepp Herberger, and of course becoming a manager in 1964 himself. But let's turn to the Italian manager Ferruccio Valcareggi. What can you say about his trajectory up to this point?
Ferruccio Valcareggi was totally, as often in Italian history, a product of the Italian Football Association. Very often, maybe not in recent times, but there's always been a sort of a tradition to grow coaches in the Italian system, in the Italian national team. And Valcareggi was assistant coach of Edmondo Fabri in the World Cup 66. People remembered him as an average player when he was young, but he didn't have any top coaching experience except being part of the national team as the assistant coach. He actually, before being appointed, he was known because he was blamed for underestimating North Korea big time. He was because as an assistant coach, he went to see North Korea while Italy was playing. Remember, at that time, games were probably played at the same time. And he said, they ran, but they're not really consistent. So there's not much of a risk. The story was different. Italy was very unlucky. I mean, as an Italian, I have to say, at that time, there was no substitution allowed. And Italy played, let's say, most of the game with North Korea with 10 men. And anyway, they lost. Valcareggi was appointed because Fabri, of course, was fired after the North Korea experience. And Fabri was a different coach with a very good reputation, mainly because he was able, before joining the national team, to go from fourth division to first division with Mantova. And there was a big achievement, of course, that made him appointed for the national team. Valcareggi didn't have any good record, but he was the coach in 1968. And he did well. The first few games after Korea, he was together with Elenio Herrera. There was some very top manager from Inter Milan, a legend for the Italian football, but not really the type of people the right person able to adjust with politics and diplomacy that sometimes, very often, is needed also when you are a national coach with all the geopolitics and everything else. Valcareggi was much more that kind of person, able to have a good relationship with different players. He won, and a lot of credit to win the European Cup in '68, because he was very good also in understanding that playing the replay final after two games, you have to have fresh legs, new energy. And between the two finals facing Yugoslavia, he changed five players. So he was a good coach at that point, and he went to the 1970 World Cup as the Italian national coach.
We forgot to mention that in the quarterfinals, Italy defeated the hosts Mexico 4-1 with Riva coming to life. So let's take a closer look at Italy, the backbone, the tactics. And for anyone who might not be aware, can you discuss the background to the Mazzola Rivera situation and what became known as the policy of La Staffetta?
Staffetta, correct. Staffetta is the Italian for relay. You know, when and the relay when you
Pass
pass
the baton, yeah.
pass the baton. And the staffetta was this term introduced by one journalist, calling the possibility to change a player at halftime. So giving two players the possibility to play 40 minutes each. The team was, as I was saying, was a solid team, a combination of Cagliari players and Inter Milan players, two top goalkeepers, first of all. Zoff was younger, and he was in the starting team in '68. But Albertosi, as a Cagliari goalkeeper, went back to get the starting number one shirt, and he was the keeper in the World Cup in Mexico. Then it's interesting because there were these two solid, the right back and the left back, two legends, Tarcisio Burnic and Giacinto Facchetti, both very experienced and very good. Facchetti was the captain of the team. Then the two players, the stopper and the libero, at that time, number 5 and number 6, let's say, were the two Cagliari players. And this is where you can see something about the coach, because the stopper was Nicolai, that managed to play only the first game, and the libero, so in the back of the defense, was Pierluigi Cera. They was actually a midfielder in the Cagliari team, but he was playing as a libero in the national team, giving more possibility to the team to play the ball from the back with the player was more a kind of a midfielder. And it's interesting that when Nicolai was not able to keep playing for the team, the natural substitution was Roberto Rosato, that was also in the past a midfielder. So the stopper and the libero, very solid defensive players, were actually two former midfielders. A bit like what you can say about Beckenbauer at a different level. Okay? The most difficult decisions were, of course, about the midfield. Who would you play? There was the need to have a very solid, energetic, quote unquote, dirty player like Bertini to do the dirty work, but also the quality was, of course, needed. And the challenge was, who do you play? Do you play Rivera? Do you play Mazzola? Do you play Giuliano? These are the players more talented in the midfield. And this was the eternal discussion. How the best players that should all play. Now we need to have a better balance. De Sisti, Giancarlo De Sisti, very important for Fiorentina, was another hard worker, maybe the one more able to combine both quantity and quality. But there was no doubt that we needed somebody able to support and to deliver quality balls for Gigi Riva finishing. Gigi Riva was able to get the ball maybe in the midfield and to go the old way, but we're talking about the World Cup final. We're talking maybe that was needed. So the Mazzola Rivera always been there. They are the two most influential players of their time. Inter Milan, AC Milan, country totally divided. There was this perception if Mazzola is the best player of the match, is the best player of the match, but we don't win. We are not sure about the result. If Gianni Rivera is the best player of the match, I think we win. So, the quality ball that he was able to deliver was probably, but at the same time, from the athletic point of view, huge difference. Mazzola was able to cover up and down the field. Rivera was a bit more static, old-fashioned, we would say today, but quality ball, able to find Prati in the AC Milan team and Gigi Riva in the team. The staffetta starts probably with this Israel game. It's something that we have been discussed forever, but in reality it hasn't really applied to many games. It's only something that we discovered in the Israel game where after 45 minutes, Domenghini, the most generous player that we had on the right wing, really covering miles and miles, ups and downs, and be the most important player in the first part of the tournament for Italy. He left after the first half to be replaced by Rivera. So Rivera start his World Cup in the third game against Israel. And then when we are 1-1 to Mexico in the quarterfinal, he replaces Mazzola. So this is the first game of the staffetta. And this is when the whole country and Valcareggi is also able to understand, okay, this guy can really help to make the difference. When in the second half of the game, probably the speed is going down and the quality counts more, he can be very effective. He's the one that is able finally to give an opportunity to Gigi Riva, as you say, to score twice against Mexico. So the staffetta is repeated again in the match that we are discussing today. After the first half, with Italy winning 1-0, so not being down, but still winning, Valcareggi has, quote unquote, the courage to say, okay, let's try to defend because we're winning 1-0, but still try to be positive and playing Rivera in the second half. So Mazzola first half, Rivera is the second half. That's the staffetta. So the historic staffetta is actually based on two matches, Mexico and Germany, because the one before Israel is not Marcelo and Rivera, and the final has a different story altogether.
There are stories that Rivera in the first round was so downbeat and demoralized that the AC Milan president, Franco Carrara, had to call him regularly to boost his morale. And apparently, the AC Milan manager, Nereo Rocco, was even sent to Mexico to defuse the situation. In fact, I think Rocco had proposed that once they return home, a match should be played between the starters and the substitutes. And then, according to Rocco, everyone could see whether Valcareggi was right in his decisions. But in the end, like you said, Valcareggi came up with this compromise of La Staffetta. Like you said, it was only for a couple of matches, but it's remained in history.
Correct.
Let's get back to yourself. Where were you in life as this World Cup and this match kicked off?
How did you? How do you know I was alive? No, I was. Yeah, I was actually 13. I was in Rome, my home city, where I'm back now. And of course, the legend around the World Cup of Mexico for our generation was, and in general, because it was also because of the TV. The TV was already there in 66, but in 70 there was a better coverage, right? But also made by the time difference. This fact to watch matches started at 11 p.m. or midnight was something really that made this tension and excitement around the tournament from the beginning, right? And I don't know if it was naive or because if you think of West Germany, if you think of England, it was very strong England, West Germany, and of course the South American teams, especially Uruguay and Brazil at that time. Logically, I don't think Italy was should have been expected to be up there with these top two, three, four teams. But when you are a kid, you feel like we're going to make it, we're going to win, nobody's going to stop us. We have Gigi Riva, the white Pelé, and things like that. So there was this sense of excitement, even if there were all this controversy about who was going to play.
Let's look at this historic match played on June 17, 1970 at the semifinal stage. Let's remind everyone that on the same day, Brazil of Pele were facing Uruguay and they would win 3-1. This match against West Germany played at the Azteca at Mexico City. We have the following lineup for Italy. In goal, Enrico Albertosi of Cagliari. In defense, as you said, right back, left back, Tarcisio Burgnic and Jacinto Facchetti, both of Inter. And of course, Facchetti is the captain of the team. Pierluigi Cera of Cagliari and Roberto Rosato of AC Milan. And Rosato would be replaced in the overtime stage by Fabrizio Poletti of Torino. In midfield, you have, like you said, Mario Bertini of Inter, who, as far as his role, I think modern audiences may relate him to someone like Antonio Conte, like an engine worker in the midfield. And you have Angelo Domenghini of Cagliari. And side note, Angelo Domenghini had been a former Inter player of the great Herrera era, and he'd been exchanged with Roberto Boninsegna of Cagliari, each going in the opposite direction. So at this point, Domenghini is with Cagliari, and he would have the distinction of winning the Scudetto with both Inter and Cagliari. We have Giancarlo De Sisti of Fiorentina, who had won the Scudetto with Fiorentina in 1969. We have Sandro Mazzola of Inter. And of course, because of the staffetta, he'd be replaced by Gianni Rivera of AC Milan in the second half. And up front, we have Roberto Boninsegna of Inter and Luigi Riva of Cagliari. Looking at the West German team managed by Helmut Schön, we have Sepp Maier of Bayern Munich in goal, Karl-Heinz Schnellinger of AC Milan, Franz Beckenbauer of Bayern Munich, Willi Schulz of Hamburg, Berti Vogts of Borussia Mönchengladbach, Wolfgang Overath of Köln, Hannes Lohr of Köln. He'd be replaced by Reinhard Libuda of Schalke in the 53rd minute, Uwe Siller of Hamburg, captain of the team, Jürgen Grabowski of Eintracht Frankfurt, Gerd Müller of Bayern Munich, and Bernd Patzk of Hertha Berlin, and he'd be replaced by Ziggy Held of Borussia Dortmund in the 63rd minute.
The referee is Yamasaki.
Oh, yes, the Peruvian Arturo Yamazaki, yes, of
And we
Japanese
were,
origin.
as kids, we were fascinating because he was always introduced by the Italian commentators as Peruvian, Japanese, Mexican, Mr. Yamasaki.
It was obviously a contrast in styles. We have the free scoring Germans lining up against the man marking Catenaccio inspired Italians. We should also remember that Germany had not defeated Italy since 1939 at this point. Italy takes the lead in the 8th minute when Roberto Boninsegna scored with a long range shot from outside of the box after a combination play with Riva. After this, Italy defended to preserve its lead for the rest of the regulation time. And the Germans would just attack, 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 but to no avail. So it was in the 53rd minute that Helmut Schön made a tactical substitution. Libuda replaced Loch and he moved on to the right wing. And at this point, Grabowski moved to the left wing, taking up Lohr's old position. So now Germany had five players up front, three in midfield and only two in defense, as they're searching desperately for an equalizer. From the 62nd to the 79th minute, the Germans had as much as 10 chances. In the end, they forced 17 corners in regulation time and could have had three penalty appeals. Helmut Schön would make another tactical substitution in the 63rd minute with Held coming on for Patsk. In this spell, Italy were just defending, and even the Staffetta substitution of Rivera and Mazzola did not seem to have a beneficial impact as far as the match, as Italy were just content to hold on to the lead while the Germans were desperate for an equalizer. We come to the 66th minute, and that's when Franz Beckenbauer was fouled and he dislocated his shoulder. And of course, the image of Franz Beckenbauer playing with his arm in a sling for the rest of the match is one of the lasting memories of this match, as he stayed on bravely as Germany were still trying to fight back to get an equalizer. Just as it seemed like Italy was able to pull away a win in the very last minute in injury time, Grabowski crosses from the left and Schnellinger dove to score and force an equalizer. What was the feeling as far as you as a spectator at this point?
Let me mention a couple of things just to give you not another perspective, but you mentioned a couple of things. You say desperate at some point when you're referring to Germany attacking. And you mentioned, for example, the penalty appeals. I think there was this sense in the German team to be the better team, and they probably were. They went from the excitement and the energy and the reality check of beating the world champion, the revenge to England, to play a team that they respected, probably because of the way they were defending, but they didn't expect to have such a strong, compact defense on the other side. So minutes were going through and they became more nervous. You see a lot of hands in the air, the protesting. The two players, Held and Libuda, were they went there with a mission to increase speed more than anything else, and this created maybe even more frustration when Italy was more and more at ease in defending to some way. So it was a frustration that was sometimes the case when you were playing Italian teams, right? Italy played more like a club team. That kind of being together is something that you wouldn't see very often in the national teams. Even Brazil, that probably is the best ever team, was more a national team than a club team. You can see the players can operate in a way that is something that they do every day, every practice. And the Italian team, even with players from different clubs, were able to be together. And you also mentioned injury time. Remember also that at that time there was no communication of how many seconds or minutes were going to be. It was total discretion of the referee, even if the referee was expected, I don't know if it happened, to communicate to the players 1 minute, 2 minutes, whatever. The players were entitled to ask the question, but not official communication. So there was no knowledge for how long they were going to play after 90 minutes. To the point that you might know the legend of that Schnellinger, a player that never scored, never went on the other half, or very rarely. There was this legend that he was actually walking towards the locker room thinking that the game was over, and he was so disappointed that he didn't want to shake hands or anything. He wanted to go just on the other side. So he ended up being in the box and scoring the goal that opened the way to the extra time. But the feeling was okay. That's it. That's done. You know, Italy cannot. It's going to be Germany is going to fly. Italy is going to be, and then you start the extra time and you realize what happened. Where's Rosato, the player that was able to stop one way or another Mueller? That was our nightmare, and Mueller didn't score in the 90 minutes, and suddenly the game with no communication, the commentator doesn't realize and say, what's Poletti doing there? Who's not playing? Rosato is not playing because he got injured. He was playing the last few minutes with an injury. He couldn't play in the extra time. And Poletti with 0 minute in the World Cup so far was there. And of course, he was a bit lost at the beginning.
This substitution could have been disastrous because he was partially responsible for Germany's go ahead goal in the 94th minute. And perhaps the Germans, having scored at the end of the match, they were perhaps more confident going into the extra time. In the 94th minute, the Germans take a corner from the right side. Uwe Seeler headed it. Poletti tried to retrieve the ball for Albertosi to pick up, but Gerd Müller snuck in and with a slight touch on the ball, he got it past Albertosi, and the Germans were ahead. And in retrospect, I think Uwe Siller stated that this is the point they lost the match. He stated that they thought they had done the hard part and relaxed, and Italy took advantage from then on. So just 4 minutes later, the Italians would tie the match. This time another defensive mistake, from this time from the Germans. So Rivera sent a free kick into the box. Sigiheld should have cleared it, but he didn't do it properly, and Bugnic knocked in the loose ball. So we're 2-2 at the 98th minute. Italy would take the lead in the 104th minute. Angelo Domenghini crossed from the left side, and Luigi Riva shot past Sepp Maier. But the match was not over. In the 110th minute, the match was tied again to 3-3. Libuda crossed from the right side. Uwe Siller headed across for Müller to head in from close range. And the match is 3-3. This was his 10th goal of the World Cup, and he would be the top goal scorer in this tournament. And perhaps as a result would win the Ballon d'Or at the end of that year, Gerd Müller. However, just a minute later, in the seesaw match, Italy would put the game beyond reach for the Germans. On the left side, Boninsegna crossed from the left, and Gigi Rivera scored the fourth Italian goal. There were still 10 minutes left, but I guess the Germans at this point would have been demoralized after so many goals back and forth. Although they did have a chance with Müller near the end, and I think Beckenbauer was opening the box, but Müller chose to do it individually and failed. And there's a scene of Beckenbauer in anger punching the ground. The match was over. Italy had won this classic. What emotions did you go through as you're watching this overtime and this whole back and forth, back and forth?
Well, it was too much. I mean, it was really not me, but maybe as a kid you don't realize everything. I was thinking while you was talking that if something is the same evolution of the game would happen today, I would probably turn off the TV when Germany scored the second goal. I wouldn't watch it. I wouldn't stay because it was over. I can guarantee you that that's everybody thought, but I don't think my dad thought about turning off the TV while we were watching. We kept watching, but with no hope. A goal conceded at the very last minute by a player that never scored. And then the Politti mistake, the Müller scoring 2-1, Germany celebrating. It was over. And probably the Burnic goal was the most unexpected because, again, Burnic, first goal in the national team, first time that I remember him in the box. At that time, defenders, they didn't even go there jumping on a corner kick or in the box. It was rare. Maybe there were some players, but he was a pure defender, man marking and so on. So, but he was there. He went there and he scored the 2-2. He didn't even know how to celebrate. And then it was just pure adrenaline all over the place. Domingo, as we call Domenghini, he had no legs left, no energy, but he was still running up and down, and making possible to score again. And then this picture again that when you hope you're again on top, you cannot even think that after 3-2 something again can happen, right? A game that has not seen goals for 90 minutes, basically. It was delivering a goal, one after another. And then you have this other situation that Rivera is on the post and the ball is passing between him and the goal post for the 3-3 goal. And Albertosi blaming Rivera for not stopping the ball. And then 10 seconds later, from 0 to hero, Gianni Rivera is the one scoring again. It was something difficult to explain. Even Italy 3-3, ball again to start the game again. Instead of going back, as you would think, just passing the ball, they had this idea of going forward. And Boninsegna doing the last run and trying to find and surprising the German defense again for the fourth time was unbelievable. So the emotion was huge. You were realizing you were watching something. I don't know if we were thinking on the 3-3, okay, 10 minutes to tossing the coin because they would have decided who was going to be in the final. There were no penalties again in that tournament. But I never crossed the mind. You were just watching something that you never expected before. And so it was really, really special as it has been recognized later as well.
So, where you were, can you describe the celebrations afterwards?
I lived in an apartment, not in the historic center of Rome, but in Rome, I was on the third floor with buildings all over around, with the street where we used to play our every day, where we used to kick the ball on the street and so on, and everybody were on the balconies, and I was very jealous for older kids and people that it was basically the very first time that thousands and everybody went on the street after the game. I don't think there were people on the street after the Mexican game. I don't think there were people on the street celebrating after winning the Euro, the European in 68. Even if it was Rome, there was a lot of celebration in the stadium. I was in the first final in 68 when we played Yugoslavia and we tied, but I couldn't go, I guess, before I couldn't go again in the replay. But I don't think there were street celebrations. But after the Germany was really everywhere, not only in Rome, but everywhere, people in the street celebrating. And it was like a change in the way people were living this experience of winning something. Because I remember people on the street before the final, in the morning, at lunchtime, in the afternoon, people going around with cards and flags. Everybody was getting in the shops to get the green, the white, and red to make flags home. My grandma made flags and everything else. So the celebration was big, definitely, because it meant a lot. But one of the things, of course, was being in the final and playing against Brazil, but was also the game itself was too much. Winning that way, in that spectacular way, with what, 6 goals in extra times in 30 minutes, it was unbelievable, right? I mean, we had big games later in 82, the France-Germany semifinal, and even in more recent times with a lot of goals in extra times and so on. But there was something, it was combining everything. It was the right time for football to have something so magic. And of course, was a defeat was Germany, but it's really one of these games that you can see that they didn't lose, right? They might have regrets because, of course, unfortunately, they were more tired, probably, playing at 2000 plus meters with England before. So, I mean, 2 matches.
For a lot of people, that's a takeaway that the Germans may have been exhausted after the match against England, and that's why there were so many goals in this overtime.
Yes, yes, that's no doubt. Even if you don't associate tired with Germany because they were so strong, physically, so athletic, all the players, even the players that you were trying to think they were the most maybe technical or like Sealer, not Young or Overath, that was not as fast as other players, but they were so good. It was a great team, no doubt.
Do you think, in terms of tactics, the Italian plan was on point until the injury time?
When you just defend that, the time doesn't go by, right? The game lasted forever because the way Italy was playing, right? Even if you don't use all this way of wasting time that you see these days, because I don't think it was not really in the blood of the players at that time. But yes, it was a defense game. I mean, I wouldn't know. It was a combination of we were more comfortable in defending, but also there was no choice. Germany was much more aggressive with the wings. Basically, at some point, as you were saying, there were 2 wings, but also 2 forwards. But Italy had the players to adapt to these situations.
Do you remember if the tactics changed in any way after Beckenbauer's injury?
As a kid at that time, it looked like he was actually playing better. No, not better, but he was more visible. It's like he wanted the ball more. He was more involved. But maybe this is my recollection, and maybe it's wrong. But this idea of this guy with this shoulder, with this white thing, remember black and white TV? To me, he was always there. He was always there with the referee. I felt like he was able to have an influence on his team, on the referee, on the whole thing because of the leadership and the charisma of the individual. Yes, in retrospective, what can you say? I mean, definitely, I think I could see, I don't know if you remember this moment where, I don't know if it was they were complaining or something. He was there with other players and somebody touched him. Not a foul or anything. I think maybe a teammate, and he could see the pain. He felt like the pain was huge.
They reached the final, and 4 days later, they would have to play the great Brazil of Pele, Jairzinho, Rivellino. I could go on and on, all the players.
Yeah,
So,
the 5 number 10s.
yeah. Would you say that the fatigue from this particular match made the game against Brazil a foregone conclusion?
Well, the fatigue was there. I vividly remember the press and the newspapers talking about the changes, right? And this is why I mentioned, because I know we were going here. That's why I mentioned, I gave credit to Valcareggi in 68 to be brave and making 5 substitutions when Italy had to replay Yugoslavia after 2 days. So there was a big thing about we need to make changes. We need to have fresh players, maybe to play Brazil. Maybe not 10 or 5, no, but 1 or 2, why not, right? And this didn't happen. On the other side, adrenaline and everything else. It's a thin line when you play the game. And, if things are going in a certain way, in a certain direction, you don't feel, or you pretend you don't feel being exhausted. But when there's something that you don't expect, or something going in the wrong direction, or maybe when you realize, okay, that one goal is not enough, you need two goals, it's much more difficult. So Italy, at the end of the game, played with the same formation and played a very decent first half, to the point that maybe the best save in the first half was made by Felix, the Brazilian goalkeeper. Anyway, it was 1-1 after the first half, with Italy able to score with Boninsegna, maybe for the Brazilian defense conceded something, right? Not only to us, but even to Peru and Uruguay previously. There was always a chance, and Italy knew that and played a decent. Of course, the shock was when Rivera didn't come in at the first half.
Yes, he only
Because
played the last six
again,
minutes. Yeah.
remember, you are 13, you are
Mm.
11, you are 13 years old. And what do you understand of the game? We beat Germany with Rivera coming in the second half and scoring the 4-3. National era, right? So it's automatic. 1-1 with Brazil. You give the drops to your grandmother just to be calm, relax. Rivera is coming in now, and let's see what happens, right? In the second half. And they start, and they show this guy, Giuliano, entering the field, but no Rivera. And there was not even something happened to Rivera. He's not well. Something happened. There's not even the possibility that the coach, the Valcareggi, didn't choose him to play in the second half. And this is what happened. And of course, you cannot relate what happened later with the fact that Rivera was not playing, but in the imagination, in the narrative, that's what happened. We lasted another 10, 15, almost 20 minutes, I think. And then when Gerson scored the 2-1, that was
The match
there.
was over. Yeah.
There, what the match was over. It was clearly also was a it was a great goal, of course, but again, Albertosi was another hero. And we felt like Albertosi wouldn't have conceded a goal like that 3 days ago, 4 days ago. But that was over. Now Rivera going one, and what do you do? The wrong team on the other side, right? They start enjoying passing the ball, and they never felt tired because they're Brazil. When they have the ball, they're in control. They kill you, right? And that was it. And
Yeah.
then the irony that when we were not almost following the game anymore, 6 minutes to go, Rivera comes in. What? Are you serious? So he could have played, because we felt like, I mean, he probably felt ill, stomach. There was all these things about Montezuma being in Mexico. Something happened. The only reason that you could think Rivera wasn't playing was something to do with his physical form. He plays 6 minutes. Anyway, that's how it went. But for an hour, Italy was pretty much there. I watched the first half. I was surprised because I didn't remember Italy being there pretty much in the game with the same. I mean, Brazil was, as you were saying, these things about all the five players up front, they were able to play number 10 in their club teams, right? Gersinho, Gerson, Tostao, Pelé, Rivellino. Of course, it was the best team, and playing in Mexico after a 3-week tournament, probably impossible. A well-deserved win. No, no, no regrets.
So getting back to the game against West Germany, do you think some of the mystique of this match it's because it occurred during the television age?
We grow up as with the passion for the game with this game in the 30s when Italy played England. We were world champion. I think it's 1935.
Oh, Battle of Highbury. Yeah, yeah.
Battle of Ivory.
November
We were world
1934. Yeah,
champion.
yeah.
They were masters, right? They never competed. They didn't want to. But we went there, Highbury playing England, to demonstrate something. And we lost 3-2 with England, a legendary game, saving penalties, playing with 10 men and everything else. But this is a game that you read about, you really don't know, right? You really don't
Right.
know what kind of injury Luisito Monti got. It's more on the books, in the articles. And so Italy, West Germany 4-3 has all the elements also, yes, because of the TV. As I was saying, it was perfect from the European standpoint. Watching this game in the middle of the night on TV, on extra time, in a tournament for the first time where you could have two substitutions with all these goals, goals saved on the line, the referee, there were all the elements to make something big. And the TV, yes, I think made the difference, right? It was more or less the time, 65, 64, 67, where Italians got up two, three times in the middle of the night to listen on the radio our boxing Nino Benvenuti fighting at the Madison Square Garden, the same boxer, Emil Griffith. And most of the Italians got up in the middle of the night to listen on the radio these matches, commentated live from New York on the radio. Can you imagine that you could actually watch the semifinal of the World Cup in another continent in the middle of the night? I mean, amazing, right? And because we are Italians, of course, kids were allowed. School was over, right? Because we're talking about mid-June. There was no school the next day. It was just probably finishing the week before or something. So it was perfect, right? Football stickers. Again, I don't even know if the Panini, I don't think, I'm not sure the Panini, there was a
Yeah,
66.
70. I think it was for 70. I think there was Panini for 70. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, the 70, I know everything. I can
Right.
tell you, all the 66 were like magazines were doing
Right.
stickers. So it was a bit different. But 70, there was the Panini. So huge,
Right.
right? Everything is
Right.
connected to make it the World Cup. And in the World Cup, you have this match.
1934 and 1938 World Cup champion Giuseppe Meazza. He was writing for La Notte, and he stated that the Italians they played a memorable match that will enter our football and world football history. We have proven to the world that we can also attack and score goals. Looking at it back then and looking at it now, is this match still discussed in Italian culture, football or otherwise?
Yeah, no, it is. It is the match for the reason that we were saying. And at the same time, I don't want to say it's an evolution of the catenaccio because it was probably a defensive game, but the fact, the contradiction in terms, we play defense, but we score four times is something that made us proud and thinking that the system worked. So, yeah.
It also says a lot about Italian football culture that the importance of a player like Bertini has been often referenced throughout the decades when discussing this match. How Italy needed someone like that, someone who does the hard work. This is the age of Italian Catenaccio, and it was in the Italian football psyche that you need to have someone like Bertini.
Absolutely. 1982, Oriali, 2006, Gattuso. And it's interesting. that if you think of the Italian music, singers, and songs, there are often more quoted these type of players than the Baggio and
Mhm.
Riva and others.
And the
It's
whole idea of like grinta for the
yes,
team, yeah,
it's the grinta. It's like if you want to recognize in life that you can make it, that you can achieve. You think of this kind of players. You don't think of the stars or
yeah,
everything else. Maybe so the Gattuso. There are songs where Gattuso is mentioned. Piper Oriali for the same thing. Yes, and these are the ones that make the stars, the quality
yeah.
player
The
shining,
the
right?
underrated hard worker. Yeah,
Right. I always remember that Michel Platini, talking about another top player, always gave credit to Bonini
oh yes, Massimo Bonini.
in the
Yes,
Juventus team. Yeah, I wouldn't be Platini if Bonini wasn't there,
right.
right? Going up and down, and Furino, same thing at the Juventus. So these players are always very important, of
Yeah.
course, especially when you have to face a midfielder like Germany. I don't know if you remember, but I loved Overat.
Oh yes, of course, Wolfgang
That
Govrat
yeah,
of Cologne. Yes.
I remember when I was a kid, I say Overat doesn't know the color of his socks. He never, he was always watching like this and passing the ball, right?
Some time ago, I was reading about this. It was an English football expert. I'm not sure who it was. This English critic had said about the whole Mazzola Rivera situation. And it shows the contrast in the Italian football mentality compared to the rest of the world. And this expert was saying that the Italians were trying to fit two players in one position when they should have fit the other nine around these two.
I think that it's difficult to understand in retrospective. Usually, you think of two players with similar characteristics, but these two were very different. They could easily play together because Mazzola was a former striker, but also a very good runner. He could cover a lot of ground, up and down, very fast. Rivera wasn't fast, was just able to pass the ball where you couldn't see the space to do it. So the quality of the pass, the knowing, okay, I'm passing the ball to Prati, I'm going to pass it this way because I know he can use this ball. But if I pass the ball to Domenghini, I need to pass it in a different way. Able to think very quickly, not just one pass ahead, but three things. In recent times, Pirlo would have been that kind of player, able to think very rapidly in the sequence of what's going to happen after my pass. So Rivera was smarter technically and in the way of passing the ball. At the same time, if he was not involved, you could have felt you were playing with 10 men. While with Mazzola, you never felt like that. He was always part of the game. He was more involved, but maybe without the sparkling and the magic touch that. So they could have played together. At some point, Mazzola adjusted almost on the right wing to have a chance to play. And they've been playing together other times, right? But the mystic, as you were saying, around the 10 days that they used to have 45 minutes each will stay forever.
Yeah, and of course, by 1982, Enzo Bierzot took the easy way out and avoided any such controversy by never even selecting Evaristo Becalossi. Yeah,
Correct.
that's
Yes. Yes. Because these are players that they change. Right. Absolutely.
and looking back, like for 1994 World Cup, Gianfranco Zola had had such an excellent season for Parma, but he almost didn't get a look in because obviously Roberto Baggio was firmly established in a position.
Yeah.
So that's a similar situation.
At the end, the results make the difference to remember or to forget. I remember when Italy went to 1982, selecting Paolo Rossi after the 2 year
Oh, yes,
suspension
yes.
with only a couple of games in his legs
Yeah,
was
and
like
didn't select
unfair,
Pruso.
unfair.
Yeah, yeah,
Pruzzo, no?
yeah,
Pruzzo left
yeah,
home
yeah.
and Paolo Rossi, but who could blame Berzot now, right?
And a frequent guest on the podcast, Mr. Franco Spicciarello, always mentions that for that, obviously he didn't take Pruzzo, but he selected Franco Selvaggi and let him know that he would not select him. He's just coming with the
Yeah,
team and he shouldn't make any fuss or any problems within the team.
yeah, you're right. In 82, yes.
As far as the German perspective of this match, I imagine for obviously for the Italians, for all the reasons you mentioned, this seems to be part of the football culture. It doesn't seem to have been as much for Germany because obviously then they would have the 1974 World Cup triumphs, and those probably stand out more in the German culture rather than this match that they lost. I imagine for Germany, it will be about the heroism of Franz Beckenbauer to play. And again, going through the decades, an example of Germany's never say die attitude. In closing, do you think it is justified to call this match as the match of the century, as the plaque at the stadium calls out?
Yes, I think so. I'm not a big fan of the Ballon d'Or, of anything where it's very difficult to compare different times. I'm also follow cycling, and I'm not a big fan of comparing cyclists of different times and period. Things are very different, and so there are a lot of matches that would be equally exciting to remember. But if we're playing a game of selecting one match, I would say that yes, it is the most exciting match that we have seen. The what happened, this changing how many times the leader changed during the game, right? The last minute in regulation time. That's everything is there. Everything there, if I may, without too much. Yes, luck played a role, but without a lot of controversies or penalties or VR of these days. So it was just an amazing 120 minutes altogether.
And you're one of the lucky ones who witnessed it in real time.
Yes, yes, that's one to remember. Yes.
With that, I would like to thank you for sharing your memories of this historic match that I'm sure will live on into the next decades and will be part of football culture of not just Italy, but the World Cup history. And remind everyone that all our contact information is listed on the blog and podcast uploads. So, Roberto, thank you once again and hope to continue these discussions on football history. Thank you.
Thank you. Always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ciao. Bye bye.